Hello, horror fans, and welcome back to Jay versus Horror. I'm your host, Jay Wall, and this is the Horror Hound Showdown. Tonight, guys, we are talking about our top 10 favorite horror franchises, and we have a very special guest with us. Give us a warm welcome for Wesley Jones, Real Talk, a movie podcast. How you doing, Wes?
Man, I'm doing good, Jay. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right, and it is International Women's Day as we filmed this, so we want to put the shout out there for that. And Wes, can you tell us a little bit more about Real Talk? I know a lot of people out there have heard of it, but just kind of lay it out for us a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I just want to thank you so much for having me as a guest tonight. I don't my podcast and the people that listen to our podcast, not all of them are all into horror and stuff like that. So I try not to do a ton of horror episodes. So when I get invited to come on horror podcasts, I get real excited because obviously it's my favorite genre and I love to talk about it. But anyway, so Real Talk a Movie podcast. I've got two hosts. We've got T Man and Gabe, and we've been buddies since college, and that's been getting close to 20 years now. And we started the podcast back during the pandemic. So that is one positive that came out of the pandemic was we finally got our podcast off the ground. And what you can expect from Real Talk is we're a non-format podcast. Like we wanted to keep it open so we could just talk about any movie, any director, any actor, just whatever we wanted to do for episodes. And as we got started, just churning out a few episodes here and there, we got into doing some interviews and having some pretty cool guests on, directors and actors and producers and different things, mainly in the indie world. But one of our last interviews we got to do, we were fortunate enough to have, I'm sure as all horror fans will know out there, John Carpenter's wife, Miss Sandy King Carpenter, who produced a lot of his work, like They Live and Village of the Damned and, movies like that. So that was really, really cool to have her on our show. And we didn't realize it, but John was in the room as well. So as that interview was winding down, we found out John was in there and we got to ask him a couple of questions. So just really cool for us. And appreciate you let me shout out the show. It's Real Talk, REEL, a movie podcast.
That's right, guys. He's not trying to be punny there. That's the name of the show, Real Talk. But I enjoy it a lot. I'm a big fan. I've been listening to you guys only for a couple months now, I think, but I really enjoy the atmosphere. These guys talk like it's just like hanging out with a bunch of buddies who have really good conversation about things you want to talk about. And you guys really come through as friends in your podcast. I enjoy it a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's the atmosphere that we want to create is just we want the audience to feel like, they're hanging out in the room with us, sitting on the couch and just chilling, talking movies. So it's what we do anyway, a lot of times when we get together. So we thought, well, heck, let's just record it and put it out for other people to listen to.
And I know that anybody who listens to this, they're definitely going to want to check that out. This whole John Carpenter thing sounds amazing. So with that being said, let's get started, Wes. I'm going to let you go first, and then I'm also going to let you go last. So we'll see how that works out.
Okay.
Did you have any honorable mentions before we get started?
I wrote down a few. I didn't know if you were going to ask about honorable mentions or not. I did write down a few. So, I mean, how many you want me to throw out? And I won't obviously dive into them too much, but just I can do
Well,
a couple.
I have one. If I
Okay.
didn't, I wouldn't have asked. So I would let you do one so I could throw mine in. It's kind of an apology, honorable mention. So
Okay, cool. No, so my honorable mention I'll throw out, which I guess would be number 11, would be the Insidious franchise. I'm gonna go with that. And so here's what I did to put together my list is in my mind I was like, okay, a franchise. Let's make it so let's say it's got to have at least three movies in it, and it has to have at least two of the three that I really like. So that's the way that I put together my list. So I went with the Insidious franchise, and the first one, was made just for $1 million, and it's amazing. I thought the way that the movie turned out. You got James Wan directing and Lee Wannell writing it, who's doing some big stuff now. And I like the sequel and actually like the third one. Now, that fourth one wasn't too good in my opinion, but yeah, that's my honorable mention. I'm going with Insidious.
That's a great pick, man. I like that one a lot. And it didn't even cross my mind because actually, yeah, they just hit the fourth movie. What was it, a couple years ago?
Uh-huh. Yep.
And
The
but
Last Key or something like that, I think is what it's called.
and I think there's another one on the way now, or they're producing it right now.
Well, I
But
will watch it. You put out four movies, and again, in my opinion, three of the four are really good. So I'm willing to give them a chance with a fifth, although I really, really just did not like that fourth one.
I was not a fan of the fourth one either. But I did like the third one, and I didn't think I was going to because when I heard that they were, switching it up and they're going to go back in time and show Lynn Shay's character, her story, I thought, I don't know if this is going to work. It sounds like somebody said no and they rewrote it. You know what I mean, or something. But then
Exactly.
for me, three is one of the best.
Very tense. And I know we're just still talking honorable mention, but my wife, whenever we were dating, she was studying out in LA at UCLA, and I flew out there. I'm from Kentucky, obviously. I'm sure people can hear from my accent, but I flew out there to see her, and I was like, in LA, we got to go see a couple movies while I'm here. The different theaters, like the Grumman's or Gorman's Chinese theater. We went to that one, and we went to several others. But I took her to see Insidious 3, and that, of all the horror movies I've showed her, for whatever reason, that one seemed to scare her the worst. But it's a very tense movie and really good to be the third in a franchise.
Yeah, it's got a great heart to it, which a lot of people forget about horror movies, is that they really need a great story. And that one I thought was really good. The dad and the young girl, I thought that was a great kind of heartwarming connection between the two of them.
Hmm.
But at number 11, or my honorable mention, I had the Hellraiser franchise. It was
Mm.
tough. Like, I hate to say that I didn't have it on my top 10 because I know that makes me sound lame to some of the people out there. But guys, I mean, the first two movies are stellar, and of course, especially the first one being Clive's first directing gig, and at the same time, he's writing Cabal while he's directing Hellraiser in this little house out in the English countryside. And so yeah, I love the first one. I love the second one. After that, three and four kind of maintained the spirit. And then we get into all these sequels where the scripts weren't even Hellraiser scripts. They were scripts they bought from somebody and said, hey, here's $50,000. I hope you don't mind if we pencil Doug Bradley in here for 15 minutes. And so, yeah, I didn't love the sequels. Now, the sequel that I did like that everyone seems to hate, I won't say I like it. That's strong. But Hellraiser Revelation. Now that movie's been torn apart by everybody because this is the one where the first time they switched from Doug Bradley to a new actor. But I thought the script was strong, especially the beginning. Like the first half of the movie, I thought really really worked. It kind of tuckers out towards the back, but yeah. So that's what I had for honorable mentions. And if there's any Hellraiser fans out there who can't forgive me for that, I understand.
Well, they're really not going to like me. I always have enjoyed the first Hellraiser, and you're right. The sequel is pretty strong as well. But I don't know what it is about those movies. They just don't grab me. They're just not interest to me really. I think the Pinhead character's pretty cool, but I don't know. It's like a gothic horror type film. I don't know if you agree with that statement, but I've never really got much into the gothic type horror. Um, so yeah, I really stopped. I think I stopped after three maybe, and I haven't seen any of the other ones, but definitely enjoy the first one. It's a solid movie. I actually need to watch it again. It's been a while since I've seen it. But yeah, they really won't like me. At least you got it into your honorable mention there.
Like with Stephen King, every time they put out a Stephen King movie, 90% of the comments you're going to see is the book was better. I don't think there's anything that Clive has done visually that the book wasn't better. I mean, this guy is a master of prose. I mean, he writes like nobody else. I love Stephen King. I love Dean Koontz. I love Peter Straub. But nobody writes with the ferocity that Clive does, his language and just the way he puts it on paper. And so then when you see it on screen, it's always a little like, yeah. I always wanted to see a Candyman Hellraiser mashup because I would just love to write the dialogue for that movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get started. What do you have for number 10?
All right. For my number 10, this just changed tonight. So I was having a hard time with my list because, so many of these franchises, obviously they start off really strong with a really great movie, and then you might have another one or two in the franchise that are really good. But in most cases, the entire franchise as a whole, it's hard to say that, oh, all these movies are good. And that's the case with my number 10. So I went with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And of course, I like the first two. The third one, I can't even recall anything about that. But then we go on a streak where you get, what's the one with McConaughey?
The Next Generation.
Next Generation. That is a really, really bad movie. But I don't know about you, Jay, but I really liked the remake with Jessica Biel and Arlie Armory, although, I thought that was a really good remake. And then there was a couple other ones. I think the one with Alexandria Daddario was watchable. Like, it just has a lot of entries that interest me. And the first one is one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and a lot of people can say that. But I really like this Leatherface character. I like the family. I like the Texas setting. The chainsaw. I'm not much of a gore hound. Like, I can appreciate good kills for sure, but man, of all the kind of the gore type thing, a chainsaw, that is, it's like the wood chipper in Fargo. It is just such a terrible weapon for a masked killer, especially a mask made of somebody else's face. So anyway, I went with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I like the franchise as a whole. Obviously, nothing is as good as that first one, but again, really, really like that remake as well.
I agree, man. I like this franchise. I know, honestly, out of all the franchises that are big named, I'm not talking about Puppet Master or Leprechaun, but like the big name franchises, this one's probably the most screwed up, right? There's no continuity in this franchise whatsoever.
That's a great
every
point.
10 years, they tried to restart it, right? In 86, they tried to restart it. They wanted Toby to come in and make them a slasher film because all these slasher films are making money, and he kind of came in and made a comedy, and they didn't like that. And then I think with part 3, there was also kind of an attempt from New Line to get some money out of the franchise. Of course, they did it again with 4 and on and on. The only ones that really have continuity are kind of the first 2, and then you have the remake, and there's one after that that's a prequel to the remake called The Beginning, which is confusing, right? But yeah, there's, some of these movies are really bad. Some of them are really bad. 3's not great. 4, like you said, you can see, when you watch 4, you can single out McConaughey and Zellweger a little bit, and you can look and say, these are 2 Oscar-winning actors. You know what I mean?
Right. It is very odd casting for that.
But yeah, I do have love for all of them, even though I can't exactly explain why. But at number 10, I'm going to stick with the guy that we were talking about earlier, James Wan, and I went with Saw.
Okay.
There's There's 8 Saw movies currently. There's fixing to be a 9th one, I believe. And I like this franchise. It's hit and miss. It's like all of them, like you said earlier. There's a few good movies spread out throughout the franchise. This one's odd to me because after the first one, which is just completely off the radar from anything else in the franchise, it's that great. But after the first one, I think 6 is the best. It's a weird franchise where you have to go all the way down the line to 6 and then start working your way back. I like 6. I like 4. 2's not bad. 3 it's like one of those movies. It reminds me of Friday the 13th Part 3, where I'm like, okay, I see why we need it because it's more of the story, but at the same time, it's not a great film for me. And Of course, then they have, 7 where they try to wrap things up in a crazy way. 8, they tried to reinvent it, and now we're getting another reinvention of it. But I like they call it torture porn, Wes,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I don't think people who call this torture porn have seen some of the movies that I've seen. Like we did a segment here a while back on disturbing movies, and so I went through like a month of watching these movies that people were recommending to me. A lot of them I had seen, but some of them I hadn't, and then after that, I spent about a month of not being able to sleep because I was like, oh, that's terrible. But yeah, like there's stuff like Atros and Visceral films that are just totally off the charts. And when you watch stuff like that, you come back to Saw, you're like, huh, it's a heartwarming story about someone who's trying to teach people a lesson. You know?
Heart. Did you happen to watch a Serbian film when you went through all that?
Yeah, I have seen a Serbian film 1.25 times. I watched it
Gotcha.
the first time and I was like, what the hell was that? And then the second time was a situation where I had the screener for it from back in 2011 or 2010, and somebody wanted to watch it, and I said, okay, well, I'll put it in. I put it in, and as soon as it got started, I was like, why would I watch this with someone? I didn't like watching it by myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I was about to go throw my laptop in the damn swimming pool after I got through watching that, just to make sure that, like, I mean, it's a rough movie, but yeah, I try to stand up for everything. I don't believe in censorship, which sometimes comes back to bite me in the butt because I end up having to stand up for things that I'm like, this is why we're having this argument. You guys know that, right? This movie
Hmm.
right here is why we're having this argument. But yeah, what do you have for number 9?
Before I get to nine, let me say one thing real quick on the Saw pick because one of my best friends, his name is Zach Simpson. I want to shout him out. This is his favorite horror franchise. Like he is all about these movies. And what's funny is that his favorite two are 1 and 6 as well.
Mm.
And we, for years, they came out every Halloween for a long time. And T-Man, who's a co-host on the show, and Zach and myself, we would have a little to drink, and then we would go into the theater and we'd sit down and watch the new Saw movie. And of course, T-Man and I, we like to have a good time, and when there's corny stuff, laugh at it, not just gloss over. And then when there's cool stuff, we admit that. But Zach is he's such a huge fan. He's all into the movie, and he got where he didn't really want to go with us, even though he didn't have anybody else to take to see Saw, because there's not a lot of people who enjoy it. And he would go in there, and we would sit down and get comfortable, and then he would just get up and move away from us so we could have our experience and he could have his. So I just wanted to shout him out on that
That's
Saw
hilarious
pick.
because I totally understand that. I mean, like, because those movies are like after 2 through 7 or whatever are very connected to tell this whole story, and they keep going back in time every time, and they'll go, "Oh, you didn't know about this,"
Oh, I
So I
know.
can understand somebody really trying to focus and catch all of it.
Well, he says that he understands everything. It's all cohesive, and he's got it. So any questions, just ask him. And we're always teasing him about, Jigsaw had like 30 apprentices that come out of the woodwork and all this kind of stuff. But, I enjoy it as well. It's not one of my favorite things, but I really respect the first film. Yeah, I mean, good pick. And for my number 9, and some people are probably going to say, number 9, why is this not, lower on your list or higher, depending on the way that you look at it? But I went with Nightmare on Elm Street. So I love Freddy Krueger, the character. He is a great character. There are some really fun movies in this franchise. Um, but why it's a little lower on my list is because I'm not one of those horror comedy guys for the most part. Like there's some things that I respect and there's some things that I get enjoyment out of, but I'm more of my serious horror. I like horror to be serious. I like it to be scary. And if there's, a comedic moment here or there, cool. Like that's especially during the more beginning parts of the movie. I'm good with that. But the Freddy character, he just gets a little bit too comedic for me as the series goes on. But you have, in my opinion, three really strong entries into this series. You have Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, obviously. I know everybody knows the next one I'm gonna say is Dream Warriors, which is a really fun, really good horror film. And then I was actually a really big fan of New Nightmare. And I saw it back when it very first came out. Was actually too young to be watching it. It scared me a little bit when it first came out. And another thing, Scream is kind of credited with the self-referential horror, of the 90s. But really, I mean, New Nightmare is kind of like that in a way as well. And I always felt like this is like the first really popular mainstream self-referential horror film. And so I really like New Nightmare. And then, you got Freddy versus Jason, and you have some other things that are fun. But um, again, the comedic elements are why it wouldn't be higher on my list.
That's interesting. I'll talk more about it later, but just to say, yeah, I've always said what you were talking about too with New Nightmare. I mean, New Nightmare comes out 2 years before Scream, and you can always already see that Wes is playing with these ideas. These movie inside the movie. What is a horror movie? How do we define this? How do we get to this point where everything has to be the same? And yeah, I like it a lot because of that. And I also have a great story about this. If you guys want to hear it, I'm not going to tell it again tonight. I told it the other night. I believe it's on the video we did about movies that have a special place in your heart. I told a great story about seeing this in the theater with my friend, and it was funny. I had a huge misunderstanding that night. It was actually very hilarious. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later on. I don't want to go too far into it because it's lower on my list. But
Gotcha.
At number 9, I have, this is a tough one for me too, The Exorcist. And I'm going to have to explain myself here. I mean, I always tell people you don't have to watch part 2. If you want to put yourself through that, go ahead, but you don't have to. And I think that's kind of what I was talking about with my wife. She hates The Exorcist, the original. I think it's probably one of the best films of all time. For me, it's a film that I can go rewatch anytime, and I'm gonna get a little something more out of it than I've gotten the other 100 times I've watched it. And she hates it because we were watching an interview with William Peter Blatty, who wrote it and wrote the book, I guess. And he says that he had a problem with the first one too because there's a difference between something being supernatural and something being completely impossible. He was like, there are events that happen in life that are supernatural, that are pushed by other forces, but a little girl's head turning 360 degrees around on her body cannot happen. And that ruins the story when you start putting things in there that cannot happen. So I always thought that was interesting. But then we move on to part 3, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest sequels of all time. It's terrifying, great psychological horror film with great performances from Brad Dourif and George C. Scott. And then, it came down to me, those last 2 films, I kind of like them. Even though I'm not as big a fan. Exorcist, The Beginning, and Dominion. They came out around the same time because they hired someone to do a prequel to The Exorcist. Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. I can't remember that director's name, but he came in and they shot the movie. And then, after the studio watched the movie, they're like, this isn't Exorcist-y enough. So they kept about 70% of the story. They brought all the actors back in from that movie, and they rented Rennie Harlan for a weekend, and they shot the entire Exorcist the Beginning movie, like within a month or something. And Exorcist the Beginning is the one that has the effects, and it's around the same time like The Ring and The Grudge, and you can see that they're pushing that in this movie, Exorcist the Beginning. But it's still pretty scary. There's some good jump scares in it. It's, the end sequence, I think, is very good. It's got Stellan Skarsgård, who is always a winner. And but Dominion, to me, made it more of a connection with me, even though it was more subtle and it wasn't just flat out in your face terrifying. It really made more of like the Exorcist connection with me. And so, yeah, I went with The Exorcist. It's like you said, Wes, I thought that too when I was doing this. You have to have at least 3 movies. I prefer you have 4, so we're getting away from the trilogy. And also, I think that it's just a matter of taste about a lot of things. You're not going to love every movie, but when you have 4 or 5 movies, if you love 3 or 4 out of the 5, that's pretty solid, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So did you like the Exorcist movies?
I do. I love the original. Actually, whenever they put out the, if you want to say the extended cut or um, director's cut, I can't remember what it was, but they put it back out in theaters. I think in the early 2000s, and I went to the theaters to see it. I'd obviously seen it before, but that theatrical experience, seeing it, it was amazing. And I will admit that I was very late to the party on Exorcist 3. Not that I didn't like it and had to come around. I just never seen it. I'd heard that The Exorcist 2 was so awful. I was like, well, I'm not going to go and watch, 3. I just didn't look into it enough. Well, I guess 2 or 3 years ago now, Exorcist 3 has really, like, the more movie discussions that I'm in online and see people posting, it's got a big following. And I was like, I have to see this movie. And I watched it and I really, really liked it. But I guess because I was so late to the party with Exorcist 3, I don't really think about The Exorcist so much as a franchise. I always think about it as a singular film. And then the other two, A Beginning and Dominion, I had not watched either. I had never heard, really good things about them. And but anyway, with you saying that they're pretty good, that'll make me want to watch them, especially since I liked Part 3 so much.
You can't listen to me. I say that about everything. But yeah, that's what I was getting to there with the wife. I was talking about how, she hates the first one. She won't even watch it. One time, man, I was watching it and she was in bed asleep, and she heard me and woke up and said, "Is that the Exorcist?" I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "I'm putting in my earphones." I'm like, "Okay." But yeah, I finally got her around to watch Exorcist 3 because she hated the first one so much. It was like a real chore to get her to watch it. And then finally, when she did, she's like, "I love this movie. It's great. I can't believe it's so much better than the first one." Which it's small victories, man. I swallow that.
Mhm.
So yeah, where we at here? Number 8.
Yep. Number 8. Now, number 8 is very heavily anchored by the first film, and I actually could have done this with Exorcist as well, but I just kind of described why I didn't put Exorcist on my list. But I went with the Psycho franchise. And the reason I went with that is because one of the I'm not even going to say horror films, one of the best films, period, is Hitchcock's Psycho. Like, I love that movie so very much. And what I respect about this so much is they waited 20, is it 24, 22 years? I can't remember when
I believe
Psycho
it's
2 came out.
27, isn't it?
27 may have been. I mean, I know it was a long, long time. And they made a really good sequel. Like, I really like Psycho 2. I thought it was a really interesting to see, he's pretty much had served his time and they're trying to get him back out into the real world. And I really thought it was good. And then part 3 and 4, definitely not my favorites, but I'm just such a fan of these first two movies that I thought, man, I mean, I got to find a room for Psycho on here. So I put it at my number 8.
Yeah, I think you are right. It is 22 because the original came out in 60 and the sequel came out in 82.
There we go.
So yeah, I'm a huge fan of that, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later on.
Okay.
It's a little bit further down on my list. We're bumping heads here, but at number 8, I have Final Destination. They're not
Oh,
the greatest horror films of all time. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is when I look down the line at those movies, I really enjoyed every single one of them. I mean, they're just fun, and the deaths are incredible in my opinion. I think of the film like it's a slasher film without a killer, right? We don't have a
mhm.
killer in a mask, but all the kids are getting picked off left and right, or young adults, whoever it is in each scenario. And I always like the opening, whatever the opening is. The big disaster that happens. That's always enjoyable. And I'm a big roller coaster fan, and I don't know if you remember part 3 where they had the roller coaster incident at the beginning of the
Oh yeah,
movie. That one,
scary.
yeah, it. A lot of people talk about part 2 and they talk about the log truck, and they say, well, when you're in traffic and you see a log truck, it just freaks you out. That one put me off roller coasters for a little bit. I mean, I was seriously like, yeah, I can see this all happening as we're going up the hill, and but yeah, I like those movies a lot. last time I was at Fright Fest, I talked to Tony Todd. That was 2016, I think, and he told me that they were fixing to put Part 6 out the next year, and that's been 5 years ago, Tony. So I'm still holding you to that. But
Well,
anyway,
what if it's completed and it's just in, development hell, or just trying to find uh, a studio that will take it and put it out. Wonder what's going on with it. Not
I don't
development
know.
hell. I'm trying to think.
The franchise is a moneymaker. They made money off all of them, so
Hmm.
I don't understand, what's holding them up on that. But one thing I would say is I think they kind of tried to tie up the story in that last one they did, where they made everything that had happened connect back to the original film. And so maybe there's a little bit of a discussion about how they want to go forward with that. Uh, do we want to create a new Final Destination story? Because I mean that wouldn't be hard, right?
Right.
It's just
That's
death.
what that would be my vote, honestly.
Yeah, let's start something new. But yeah, that's what I had at number 8, Final Destination.
Yep, I would. It would definitely be an honorable mention for me. I enjoy this franchise. I do think with each film, I think the quality gets a little bit less. The movie's not quite as good as the one that's as the previous one, but I do like it, especially the original Final Destination. This came out when I was in high school. It was a big deal whenever it came out. And what a unique concept that you have this, you just have death in no type of form other than just these random acts. It's just a really cool setup. And I was going to mention when you talk about, the third one put you off roller coasters as a while for a while. That is an effective horror film when it causes you after you see it to adjust your life in some way because the movie has scared you or made you aware of the danger. It's just the mark of a good film, a good effective story. So I like that choice a lot with Final Destination.
It's weird because that movie or those series of movies they put you in, like, I don't know if you've seen the number 23 with Jim Carrey, where he starts making instant connections to the number 23 that the rest of us
Hmm.
would be like, yeah, sure, buddy. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think that's what that movie does to people because you could be sitting in traffic and if you've seen Final Destination, within a couple weeks, you'll start looking around. You'll be like, that sign's gonna fall, that truck's gonna hit that truck, and then you know what I mean.
Yep.
So you start making these connections in your head. And you're like, just relax, man. And I like the concept that death has to create a way to get us. You know what I mean? Like these people weren't going to die now because this happened to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
They were going to die eventually anyway, whether they were, 27 or 40. But I think you're right. I like that first one too. And I think there was a lot of like, let's kill the American Pie kids in that movie.
I mean, that's a great point because it does feel like those teen movies of the late '90s and early 2000s so much. It has that vibe, but then you throw in this element to it of death. So I like that a lot. There, kill the American Pie, American Pie, meets death. That's good.
So I think we're at number 7.
Yep, 7. I'm going with the Conjuring universe at number 7.
Okay.
And I don't like all of these movies. I heard such awful, terrible things about The Nun, and I thought the trailer was really weak. I didn't even see it, and I'm really not a big fan of the first Annabelle movie. But you have two really strong Conjuring movies that came out. I still like the first one the best, but then the latest two Annabelle movies I thought were pretty good, especially Annabelle Creation. I really like Annabelle Creation. So there are, in my opinion, three strong movies in this franchise. You have another pretty good movie, and then two bad ones. But I saw, The Conjuring, and I've seen most of these in theater, actually. But when The Conjuring came out, it was the scariest movie that I had seen in a while. Now the ending to me with the exorcism stuff was really not as effective as three-fourths of the rest of the movie. But that clap game, I just love how Lee Wannell, James Wan, and them what they're. I don't think Lee Wannell was involved in this movie, but they put these types of, call them prop scares, into the movie, like in Insidious 2. They've got they've got the can with the string, and he wakes up in the other end of the can with a string is in the closet, and something's talking to him in the closet. They find a way to use props that are scary. In this clap game that they do in The Conjuring is just so cool. And it was very effective, very subtle. And then, of course, then you've got a couple of the visual scares, like with the demon or ghost or whatever that's on top of the wardrobe. That's just such an effective jump scare, which I typically don't like jump scares. But anyway, then from there you get a pretty good sequel where they go to a different family. It's another case of the Warren from the Warren files, and they're able to tie the universe together with these little things. The Annabelle doll, using it to create additional movies, which I believe was in real life was a Raggedy Ann doll, but obviously that Annabelle doll from the movies is really creepy. There's just a bunch of cool stuff that happens in these, and I'm not burnt out on them yet. I do feel we need a strong movie with Conjuring 3. I hope we get that. But yeah, just keep them coming for now. This is a franchise I really love.
I agree. I think for me, The Conjuring is similar to like we have talked about Silence of the Lambs, where it defies genre. It's just a great American movie, right? Because there's other themes in that movie besides horror. There's the themes of family and trying to keep your family together, and you know, also just the Warrens. I mean, I know a lot of people have things to say about them. I'm not going to get into that here, but for me, just them, showing up to help and help this family out. And yeah, I agree. Annabelle creation, I think, is pretty awesome too. I mean, it's totally like outside the, vortex of the other two movies, because it feels like something that Guillermo del Toro did or something to me. I mean, it feels like The Orphan. I mean, he didn't do that, but his protege did The Orphanage. And it seems like that to me. It's a really great film. And yeah, I'm ready for more. I'm ready for part 3 of The Conjuring. I've been ready for that for a couple years now. And moving on to number 7, I have the Omen franchise. This was a close one. I love the first 3 films so much that I couldn't keep it out. I mean, the fourth one, I think, is like an afterthought. Let's add a little girl to the mix or whatever. But the first 3 are just super strong films. And they're so well connected, in my opinion. Like, they are so well put together that I still love, like, Sam Neill in The Omen 3, The Final Conflict, is one of my favorite villains of all time, because this guy has, at this point, just totally accepted that he is Satan, and he's going with it. Let's kill all the children. Let's do this. Let's do that. And you're like, how? This guy's super evil. People around him can't see this, But Sam was perfect for that role because he has that great charisma. I mean, one of my favorite movies is Possession from 1981. It stars him and Isabel Adjani. But then, we've seen him in other things where he has this great charisma. And I believe he even auditioned to play James Bond at one point and was really, really in the mix. And he has that, kind of smirk, that kind of glimmer in his eye, and he totally pulls off the devil. I mean, all 3 films are great. A lot of these films that we've talked about, they have 3, 4 films in a franchise, and then there's a remake. And there's a remake for a reason, because the first 3 or 4 films worked, and they want to try to capitalize on that success a second time. But I really love the Omen films. I think it's one of the classic horror films out there that a lot of people have not seen. They just kind of think they know what it's about, And I think, especially that second movie, there's a lot of information in that second movie and a lot of good stuff there too, because it's kind of like where, in the first one, Damien's a little boy, and it's really hard to fault him, even though he is evil. It's hard to fault him for what's happening. And the second one is where he starts to accept what he is. And by the third one, he is full on the son of Satan, right? Just evil as hell. But yeah, I had The Omen at number 7.
Now, I have seen The Omen, and I enjoy The Omen, and I saw the remake whenever it came out. But this is not a franchise I can comment too much on, because I have not seen the rest of the movies in the original franchise, the original series there. So sounds like I need to make a note of these and check these out as well. There's no reason why I haven't saw them. I mean, I enjoyed The Omen. I thought it was a solid movie. and I'll have to add those to the list. The one thing that stands out to me from the remake, and again, it's been over 10 years, I guess, since I have seen that, but there's a scene maybe where it's all like everything is white and maybe some blood comes out of eyes or something like that. But I remember it was in a really effective scare. It was a half a jump scare, but then the image lasts for a little bit longer than your traditional jump scare. So it startled you and then it gave you like a creepy image. And I can't remember exactly what it was. But that I always think about that scare ish from the Omen remake.
I like the remake. I mean, I think it's for a remake, it's one of the stronger ones, and it's got great performances in it too. Liv Schreiber. What do you got for number 6?
All right, I'm going with Paranormal Activity, and I really like these type of. I enjoy found footage. A lot of people do not like found footage movies. One of my all-time favorite horror films is Blair Witch Project. I would probably have it top 3 or top 4 because my mind scares me a lot more than what you can put on screen. So it's like give me something to get my mind going, and then I'll wind up scaring myself. And that's what these Paranormal Activity movies do. Yes, you see things moving about. Something's there. It does attack. It does hurt people, and it's one of the. After I saw the original film, I was thinking about it. It scared me way more afterwards. And I think the first 3 movies in the franchise are all just about equally strong. With really the third probably being the second best. Now, again, I think they do a great job making the story cohesive. I like the second one. I think it's pretty good. But the trope that they used in part 3, where they take, it goes back in time a little bit to the 80s, and you got the big home video camera, and they decide to put it on the fan and have it swivel around the room. Just thought that was so effective to generate the suspense and the scares. And I wish they would have stayed more in line with these characters. I'm blanking on her name right now.
Katie.
Katie, yes. Why could I not think of that? Katie, yes. In the fourth one, they went with kind of the younger girl and started over, and yeah, they tied it in, and it wound up being pretty good too. But after that, with Ghost Dimension, and then there was another one, I believe, I wound up seeing all of them, and just didn't like the latest ones as much as the first 3. But the first 3 are so strong. I own them all on Blu-ray, that I had to get this franchise on here and had it up at number 6.
Man, I really like number 3. I mean, for me, number 3 is the top of the heap in that franchise. It's done by the guys who did Catfish. They did Catfish the movie, and they do Catfish the television show on MTV. And so these guys are very versed in how to shoot digital films, right? And just like you said, the stuff they came up with, man, that camera on that oscillating fan is one of the most genius ideas in horror movie history.
Agreed. Yep.
The way it goes from room to room and builds tension where you're going to see something at some point, and you just keep on like, is it going to be this time? Is it going to be this? And great stuff. They did some fun stuff in that, because basically, like you said, they're making us believe that they're using the old like Clark Griswold family video cameras, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, they really pulled that one off. I read a review from a Latino reviewer when the marked ones came out, and he declared that the franchise was dead, or should be, and he was very serious about this. Like, he was really upset that he felt like they targeted the Latino community with that film, because there's so many Catholic people in the Latino community, and he felt like they kind of like engineered the film to be manipulative to some degree or whatever. It was a good review. I don't know if I agreed with it totally, but I understood where he was coming from. And so yeah, I don't know if I would need any more Paranormal Activity. I think everybody's done Paranormal Activity since Paranormal Activity, but
Right. Right.
Part 3 is always going to be a favorite of mine. And it's weird because it's one of the franchises where I could say, where I can pick one out of the middle and say, this is my favorite one. I don't care about the other. You know what I mean? Of course, they're all connected, so you have to watch the first two to get anything out of the third one. But great pick there, man. At number 6, I have Psycho. What can I say? I mean, you pretty much said it all. It's 1960 Psycho is one of the only movies that never disappointed me. I mean, it's one of those old movies that somebody told me, you have to watch this. It's a cornerstone movie in the genre. If you don't watch it, then you don't get to talk about anything else. And so I went and watched it, and it's one of those old movies that when you go watch it, you're like, yep, they were right. This is that damn good, right? And I mean, everything about it and it's so crazy that they could come back 22 years later and make one of the best horror sequels of all time. And you just, in your mind, when you see Psycho 2, or before you watch Psycho 2, you're like, there's no way. There's no way this is going to be as good. Hitchcock's not involved. There's just no way. And you watch it and you're like, damn. Like, it's good, And even the end, right up to the end, because you really develop a different fondness for Norman in the second one than you do in the first one, right? You kind of feel like Norman is the victim in the second one for a long time.
Yep.
And, not to give anything away, I won't spoil anything, but yes, definitely watch Psycho 1 and 2. Part 3, things unravel a little bit. I think this is the one that Anthony actually directed, and it's just kind of like a rehash of 2 a little bit, it feels like. There's some more concepts in there. You introduce this woman who's the nun, and she's having her own issues, so we can't just focus on Norman anymore. We have to focus on her too. And it wasn't as enjoyable for me. But for me, part 4 is very interesting because it's a made-for-cable movie, but it's very good. I thought it was effective, especially the way, like, when you start to watch it, you see what they're doing. You're like, okay, they're sprinkling Norman in. The rest of it is backstory. It's basically Bates Motel, or the prequel to Bates Motel, whatever you want to call it. But, as we move along in that story, then we start to see more like, okay, Norman's doing something here too. Norman's got something on his mind in present day that he's fixing to do that's very scary. And I like that one a lot. I think after that, the remake I don't even know why they did that remake, man. Why do you do a remake that's shot for shot? I don't understand that, because you're never going to get the same effect as the original. And then of course we have the series Bates Motel, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit.
I watched it for a while too. I liked it.
It's odd to take something like that and turn it into a soap opera, which is kind of what they did to an extent. There was like, people were having love interests and different things were going on outside of just the main story. But it was interesting to see Norman kind of start to slip into this. The one thing I don't like about Bates Motel, I both love it and hate it at the same time. Vera Farmiga, right? She's playing Norma in this, and you almost start to have like sympathy for Norma because it's Vera playing her, right? And it's kind of odd because I always thought, like, nobody understands that the villain of this movie is Norma Bates. She is the true villain of all these movies, not just because she's Norman's split personality because of what she did to him,
Right.
And so I really hated the fact that this, beautiful actress that had been in all these other great horror films that I love was playing Norma Bates. I was like, couldn't they just pick somebody I can't stand?
It was definitely hard to dislike her. And another thing that I always makes me think about Psycho is, his son, Oz Perkins. I love Oz Perkins as a director. Now, I don't know that the stories in his movies are always the best, but he is visually just amazing. Like, Black Coat's Daughter, to me, for like newish horror films, is one of the scarier ones to me. And, Gretel and Hansel that he just put out, and The Pretty Thing that lives in the house, I enjoyed all those and just can't wait to see, what he does next.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, like, one of the sad things about Psycho, I guess, is that, Anthony made a lot of movies before Psycho. He made quite a few movies before. I think he even had a Best Supporting nod before Psycho. But, or maybe it was right after Psycho, I don't remember. But anyway, he made several other movies, but he never really broke away from that Norman Bates character. And finally, he became like Vincent Price, where he just embraced it. and he was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I'm just going to go with it. And I just talked about a film recently called Edge of Sanity, where he plays the character he plays in that movie is pretty genius. It's a take on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that introduces the idea that Dr. Jekyll was hooked on cocaine. That's why he became Mr. Hyde, and Mr. Hyde was actually Jack the Ripper. And so it was like the story to it always blew me away, and Anthony's performance in it is great. It's not like overall the film's a little sleazy, and that takes away from it, I think, a little bit. But uh, yeah, so just great stuff there all the way around. I think we are at number 5.
Number 5, I gotta go with The Evil Dead. And The Evil Dead, I just said earlier that I wasn't a big fan of comedy in horror films, but I made sure to catch myself there. I said for the most part, because obviously in the Evil Dead franchise, you have a lot of this kind of wacky, crazy comedy, and some of it's just still wacky and is not even really funny. But the first movie is more of the straight up horror film, and you can definitely see some of Sam Raimi's touches. What he's gonna become in the future. And just as a side note, I love Sam Raimi as a director. Aside from some of the Batman films, like my opinion, his first two Spider-Man movies blow the rest of the Marvel universe out of the water. Like I loved his movies. He's got a simple plan. He's got Dark Man. He's got Drag Me to Hell. Like all these movies that I love. But anyway, it always comes back to Evil Dead. Then you got Evil Dead 2. And whenever we did a screenwriting class, we actually studied in college, we actually studied Evil Dead 2 because of the screenplay and because of the directing. It's just such a well-respected film, just what he was able to make. And it's pretty much a remake of Evil Dead, except for more of, wacky comedy stuff than it is true horror. And then we go even further off the rails with Army of Darkness. And Army of Darkness is just a fun movie, and you get the iconic chainsaw hand that Ash has. Then there's Ash versus Evil Dead, the TV show. Now I'm going to say something unpopular. I was not a fan of the Evil Dead remake or reboot, and I know that's a very unpopular opinion in the horror community because it was very celebrated when it came out. It was just almost a little too over the top, and I normally don't like it. There's a way that Sam Raimi does it that I enjoy, where others that try to imitate it, I just don't. And I know that's kind of silly, but I think the director who did the new Evil Dead, I think his name Fede Alvarez, I think he is really talented. I actually think the movie is very well shot, very well directed. Just wasn't a big fan of it. I didn't hate it, but again, not the biggest fan. But the movie of his that I like way more is Don't Breathe. I think Don't Breathe is really intense. Is a great film, and looking forward to what he does next. But anyway, got off of the movie there, the franchise just a little bit, but Evil Dead is coming in at my number 5.
Yeah, I like the Evil Dead films. To me, the first one was scary when I was a kid. It scared me. That's around the time I was little when that came out. And so, 2 and 3 take the more comedic. I think a lot more movies do this than people realize, too. Toby did it with Texas Chainsaw 2. They did it with Gremlins 2, where the second one they changed the tone completely to throw people off, and it almost seems satirical. Like this is what you expected. Here's what you get. And but I gotta, for me, I'm the opposite from you on that. I really enjoyed the Evil Dead remake, and I don't like Don't Breathe. I love the concept of it, but I hate to me, Don't Breathe is manipulative because they make us hate this old man. I mean, they're breaking into his house. They're terrorizing him. They're not good kids in any sense of the way. They have their own problems. But that one character is really bad. The boyfriend, he is just like culturally inappropriate, by the way. Just terrible. This is what happens when a foreign director makes an American film with American characters, sometimes they don't see all the like flaws or sensibility problems. And so, like, the white guy with cornrows in his hair calls his girlfriend a bitch all the time and says horrible things. And the white guy that looks like he goes to prep school is the good guy. And
Right.
so, like, there's some issues with all that. And then, like, I just didn't like the fact. I love Stephen Lang in that movie. He is a total badass. And I hated that they interject. I hate to even say that word when I'm talking about this. I hate that they injected this other subplot into it. Like, okay, he's got this girl in the basement. Now we have to hate him. Now we have to root for the kids. Oh, you guys were thrown off. You thought you were gonna, and I'm like, yeah, I knew that was coming to a degree, but I didn't know that's how we were gonna get there. This feels terrible, you know. And then, but yeah, I'm anxious to see the second one. I mean, I give everything a chance. I watch everything. I wasn't a big fan of the first one. I don't know, like that girl too. She's in both those movies, right? Jane Levy.
Yep.
She's in both those movies, and she was in the Castle Rock thing they did on Hulu. She's very good. She's a good actress.
I think the reason why I liked Don't Breathe so much for one reason. Now I've seen it a couple of times. I own it on Blu-ray and have watched it. But it was one of the best theatrical experiences that I can remember having of any movie. Grindhouse, Death Proof, and Planet Terror is another just magical theatrical experience that I had. But with Don't Breathe, my wife and I we we got a Christmas present for this little getaway at the lake, and we went to the town that was there that night because there really wasn't anything to do when the sun went down, on the lake. So we're like, we'll go get some ice cream. Let's go see a movie. It was opening night for Don't Breathe. The theater was completely packed, and it was one of those audiences that was real interactive with the movie, but they were interactive at the appropriate times. It's not like there was a bunch of side conversations and stuff going on, that were distracting. Everybody was glued to the movie, and of course, it's a pretty intense film, with the dog and the having to be quiet and to not draw the blind guy's attention. But man, it was a wild theater experience. Everybody was jumping and screaming and just all into the movie. It's just a fun night. I wish more audiences were like that.
Did you ever see I want to say, 68 movie called Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn and Alan Arkin?
I have not seen that.
That's another thing. Like, I think it set me up to not like this one as much because that film is it's a similar premise where these guys are going to rob this apartment because one of their ex-colleagues used to live there, and they think there's something hidden inside there. And this blind girl played by Audrey Hepburn is in the apartment, and she believes someone is messing with her, but nobody else believes her because she's blind. And they plan this, to get in there and harass her and get the goods or whatever. And Alan Arkin is a really bad guy in that movie. So yeah, it's a great movie. It's just another recommendation thrown out there for people who, if you like Don't Breathe, I think you'll like Wait Until Dark. And we're moving on. Number 5, I have Scream. And I know we just have 4 movies, but to me, 3 of them are pretty strong. And there's a 5th one on the way. So the first one we talked about a little bit earlier when we talked about New Nightmare. I think it's really strong, and it's just a lot of fun, right? These kids have a great time in this movie. And it really comes through on camera. I think that it's not only a horror film and a slasher film, but it's fun. And a lot of times I don't really consider A Nightmare on Elm Street as much of a slasher as I do like Friday the 13th. It is a slasher, I guess, to an extent, but I have my reasons why I don't put it in the same category with Friday the 13th. And I think, Scream is another one of the things where Wes kind of seems like he understands the younger generation, right? And he's playing with these concepts of the meta thing. And then we move on to Scream 2, which I think is fairly strong, but not as good as the first. Scream 3, they could have kept that, as far as I'm concerned. It was just kind of like we need to do another one right now while we can cash this check. And but when they got to 4, I totally understood the franchise again. I thought this is the way it should be done. It should be done every 10 years. Let the technology change. Let the kids' culture change a little bit, and then bring Ghostface back, because that's part of the fun, is the way that he messes with kids, And I thought in Scream 4 it was smart the way, and man, that's been 10 years now. People don't realize that it's been 10 years since Scream 4 came out. But yeah, the whole idea that, yeah, Ghostface 2.0 would be digital. He'd be filming everything that he did, and he'd be doing these, and then they played with it in the series on MTV, which I couldn't stick with the series on MTV. I didn't think it was that good. But they played with the like Snapchat and stuff like that. He was getting to him through that thing. And so, yeah, I really appreciate the franchise. I don't know that. Here's where I'm at with it. I don't know that I need to see Nev Campbell and David Arquette and Courtney Cox anymore. I think we can. I'm actually thinking, like, I hate to say this because I don't want it to be a spoiler. I don't want to be right and it be a spoiler, but I wouldn't care if they killed all three of those characters off in the first part of the next movie as the shock. Like the shock opening. Or because to me that's where it's going to go. They're either going to kill off those characters, or they're going to make them the bad guys, and I'd rather kill them off than make them the bad guys. Maybe I'm wrong. They'll probably come up with a totally different idea. I hope they do. I hope it's a great film. I know that Greg Morgan from Land of the Creeps has actually done some work on that film. He did some of the carpentry and stuff for the sets they did.
Oh, that's cool.
But so yeah, interesting series. I know there's only 4 movies. It kind of feel funny, mention it when there's only 4 or 5 movies, but 3 of them are really strong, and I'm hoping for a 4th really strong movie. That's what I had at number 5, Scream.
Well, let me just throw out my number 4 because it's Scream. So I'll just talk about some of the points that you did. So the first thing, we actually have a full episode on Scream that we did back in October. For anybody who wants to go back and hear kind of our extended thoughts on it. But for my generation, for those who are in middle school or high school around the time that this movie came out, this is my generation's horror film. I think people usually think about their generation as when they're this age, whenever you're teenagers. And this was the big movie. This is the movie, in my opinion, that really brought horror back. Now, us diehard horror films can find a lot of good horror films in the 90s. Exorcist 3, we've already talked about. Some people consider Silence of the Lambs, Jacob's Ladder. There's other good horror movies, but for the most part, the mainstream audience was not paying attention to horror anymore. And we can thank the late 80s because of that. Although there are a bunch of fun, goofy slasher films and stuff like that in the late 80s that I really enjoy, again, mainstream audiences didn't. And so Scream resurrected horror, and it really paved the way for the next generation of smart horror films. And it brought respectability back to horror as a franchise. So I absolutely love Scream. It is a top 10 horror film for me. It invented a cool new killer. You've got the double killers. It's a whodunit. It's funny. It's scary. It's great. And we actually interviewed Leonora Sheffold, who played the girl in the bathroom that's dissing Sydney. It was cool just to interview her since she was directed by Wes Craven, and she was engaged to Skeet Ulrich at one time. So that was kind of cool to get to interview and talk with her. But anyway, then you come out with Scream 2, and Scream 2 is really good. I really like it. I'm a huge Sarah Michelle Gellar fan, one of my childhood crushes, adult crushes as well. But here's where they made a mistake, and I think it hurt the franchise, is you took probably my favorite character, the best character in Jamie Kennedy, and you killed him off. And I think that was a mistake for the franchise. Like, he should have at least lasted through the 3rd film, which I'm not really a big fan of. And then you've got Scream 4, like you talked about. I appreciated what they did with it. It didn't hit really well for me. I didn't dislike it. I've seen it twice now. I saw it in theaters, and then I watched it about 6 months ago just to check it out again because there had been so much talk about Scream 5. Now, I'm with you. How many freaking attacks is Sidney Prescott and Dewey and Gail Weathers, are they gonna survive? It's time to move on. It's time to do a little something different. And then the final thing you brought up was the TV series on MTV. I actually really enjoyed the first season. Now, it is definitely a little bit too, high school teeny bopperish for a guy who's in his 30s to really identify with as much, but I thought it was still pretty strong. There were some really good episodes and some that weren't as great, but I stuck with the whole first season. Then I went to season 2 and watched about 2 or 3 episodes, and it was really bad. So I never finished it, and I'm kind of done with it as a TV series. But bring on Scream 5.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. And I think you're right. I think we got to the end of the 8 because I'm probably just a little bit older than you. I think I was born in '80, so
Yep,
when
just
we
2 years.
got to the
Yep,
'90s, we're
82.
like, you guys are for real. I'm like, you guys are done with Freddy. You guys are done with Jason. What's our thing? What are we gonna have? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then Scream came, and that's kind of what, because you can't even just count it as Scream, right? You have to count Urban Legend and I Know What You Did Last Summer and those movies because they're reactionary to Scream, right? So
Mm-hmm. Valentine, those are all fun movies in there that came out, right after Scream. But it wasn't just horror. They did this with other genres as well. That try to have that kind of snappy, self-referential dialogue, and that Kevin Williamson did.
hmm even there's even what's that one that's really bad? Like they did a lot of this. I hate Scary Movie. Like the franchise Scary Movie.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
hate that franchise because I think it is one of the worst things that ever happened to horror films. Really,
Yeah.
because a lot of kids today will go, they've seen those movies, and you tell them, like, you're talking to a 12-year-old kid, you're like, hey, have you seen The Ring? You like scary movies? That'll scare the hell out of you. And then you go show them The Ring, they're like, yeah, I remember this from Scary Movie. And you're like, what? Like,
Yep.
this is not funny, kid. But I hate those movies for that reason. But there was even another one called Not Another Teen Movie or whatever. There was
Yeah.
there was a lot
Yeah.
of teen stuff in the '90s, wasn't there?
Was it like Club Lizard or
Oh, you're
whatever
talking about
that
Club
group?
Dread. Yeah.
Club Dread. Yeah, they put
Broken
out some
Lizard's
of those
Club Dread.
movies and
Yeah.
stuff, and yeah, like Naked Gun, those movies, Airplane, all those are classic hilarious comedies, but yeah, when they started, horror already has a hard time kind of paving its way into mainstream audiences, and so I don't like. I carry a little chip on my shoulder when people make fun of it or try to make it less scary on purpose. So no, I'm with you.
Yeah, I agree. Like the Police Story, or what are they called? The Naked Gun movies based on the Police Story show. They're they're making fun of a premise, of a procedural thing that we've seen 1,000 times. The scary movies, they're taking actual scenes from scary movies and making them not scary, and that's
Right.
terrible. Uh, but anyway, I'll move on because I could complain about that all night. But anyway,
You're like, I'm getting down off my soapbox.
right, yeah. At number 4, I have Friday the 13th, the franchise. Just, come on. There's 13, 12, 13 movies in this. If you count all the fan made films, there's like 582. Uh, but yeah, to me, I'll talk about this a little bit more later too, but the Friday kids are dumb and they're just templates that are always filled in each, templates that are filled in each film, that we have to have this kind of kid, we have to have this kind of kid, we have to have this, and but I truly love the movies, even the bad ones. I mean, for me, 1, 2, 4, 6. I like them all. I can't lie. Even the really terrible ones like 5 and 8, I love them. Uh, so yeah, that's basically all I have to say about that. I mean, it seems like I would have more to say about it, but I even like Jason X, man. I know it's terrible. It's kind of like a schlocky sci-fi horror film, and they say that space is where horror goes to die, unless it was born there, like with Alien or Event Horizon. But yeah, I mean, I even like that film. I think it's got some great kills in it. I like Jason Goes to Hell, even though, like, when I first saw it as a kid, I hated it. I felt cheated. But watching it later on, I got the unrated DVD of that, and the opening scene where that guy eats that heart and it's all black and gooey. I was like, I didn't know if I was going to
Mm.
make it through that scene. You know,
It's pretty rough.
but part 6, I think, is my favorite. Jason Lives. It's not my favorite in the sense where I think it's the best. It's my favorite in the sense where personally it's my favorite because to me it's the quintessential '80s Jason movie. It's also very self-referential. I mean, in a sense where they make a lot of jokes in that film that you're not going to see in any of the other Friday movies, right? Like the American
Hmm.
Express joke they make when he drops. I mean that you had to be alive in that era to even understand that joke, right? So, but I like all of them. You know, 2 and 6 I think are my favorites. 4 would be after that. The original. I like how people forget that the original is a whodunit. It's not really a it's a slasher film, but it's a whodunit, and it's more of like a teenage version of an Agatha Christie book than really like just a a lot of people say that the giallos or whatever inspired this film and Halloween and Black Christmas and all that came together and inspired Friday the 13th. I think it's just a fun movie. I think people take things too seriously sometimes, and I think a lot of people don't give credit to part 5, which is it's kind of terrible. I won't deny that, but I think it's got some good kills in it, and I think that they thought, look, they just told us that this was the final chapter. What are we supposed to do? Let's go back to the beginning and see if we can make another Who Done It, And of course, it's poorly executed. I would say these crazy shots of Roy out of nowhere, the paramedic, who is obviously like just in 2 or 3 shots in the movie, so they can say he was the killer at the end. Hey, you remember Roy? He's the killer.
That's so true.
And I always had questions like I want 10 minutes with Roy. I just really want 10 minutes with Roy because I want to know, like, first off, how can you live in this town? Your kid's in the juvenile detention center. Nobody knows that. Why aren't you taking care of your kid, Roy? You're a paramedic. You got a decent job. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then like just it's crazy to me that they tried to put that Mother Voorhees thing on Roy in that movie. He became Mama Voorhees in that movie. But yeah, that's what I had for number 4, Friday the 13th, the entire franchise.
I will save my thoughts.
All right. We're at number 3, right?
Yep, number 3 into the top 3 territory. So we're really getting down to ones that we absolutely love here. And my number 3, I'm going with Romero's Dead movies. And I have just over the last little bit gotten to appreciate how amazing of a movie Night of the Living Dead is. Uh, you know, I have over the last, I guess, decade or so, really gotten into classic films. I have own a bunch on Criterion. I actually just watched It Happened One Night, a movie from 1934, just last night. Saw it for the first time. So, uh, but anyway, really have gotten into these movies. Just love Night of the Living Dead so much. Then you got Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, and some of the other ones aren't as good. But then you get an amazing remake by Zack Snyder, one of the best remakes of a horror film with, the remake of Dawn of the Dead. There's just so many really good movies in this franchise and just two iconic zombie films with Night and Dawn. I had to squeeze them in here, and they were a little bit lower or again higher on my list depending on how you're looking at it. And I'm just like, no, I can't do that, man. Night and Dawn, that is just such an amazing 1-2 punch. Like I've got to have these movies, and I just kept moving them down. And then I bought Night of the Living Dead on Criterion and rewatched it, and it's just like just kept moving it down, moving it. So anyway, it wound up as number 3. Now, whenever you did the episode that you did on hot takes, and you asked people to give your horror hot take, they're not my favorite zombie movies. I have one zombie movie, which some people say is an infection movie. It's not a zombie movie, but I have 28 Days Later is actually my favorite zombie movie. But these two are just millimeters behind it. So I'm going with Romero's Dead series. off the strength of the first two films, along with the remake, and then Day of the Dead. You have another pretty good movie.
That's a great pick, and yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit quiet on that one for now. But
There we go.
I am gonna go to my number three pick, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it shouldn't be. There's no way it should be. It should not be this high on anybody's list, but it is on mine because I just love these films, man. And when I was a kid, I was a big Frankenstein fan, and Leatherface reminds me a lot of Frankenstein. He's not so much evil as he is just disturbed, and there always has to be a supporting villain, right? Because if there's not someone to steer him into maliciousness, then he might have just been a normal guy with some handicaps. But I love all the films. I know, like I just talked bad about them, kind of, but in the same sense, I like it. They tried to restart this franchise so many times that most of these films are almost unrecognizable from each other than Leatherface, who is also different in each one of these films. Even the remake and the prequel to the remake, he's different. Like, he's not exactly the same. And I really enjoyed him. And like one of the ones you mentioned, Texas Chainsaw 3D with Alexandria Daddario, that was for me a really great film because I like the idea that they took Leatherface and like, okay, you know what? Leatherface isn't totally evil. He's misunderstood. Let's play into that. And let's create this kind of anti-hero character. And man, I could have watched 10 more movies like that because in my mind, what I saw happening next was, we have this huge property that's fenced in. She could have invited a bunch of murderers and rapists to a party there and just like set her big cuz free on him, and we could have had some guilt-free slasher fun where he gets to kill everybody. We don't have to feel bad about it at all. But I love the franchise, man. And it's tough because it's one of those things where, yeah, it's totally a personal pick. They're terrible. Most of them are terrible. But for me, the first one is amazing. And of course, I'm a huge fan of the second one. I went to the 30th anniversary thing for this that they had with Caroline Williams and Bill Johnson and got to talk to them. And
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was great, man. It was awesome. And, I'm a fan. Like 3 and 4 are ridiculous, but at the same time, I still love them. And then I think you're right. I think the remake is strong, and what people don't understand is that remake means almost as much to that generation as the original did to that generation. I mean, it's hard. Like I listened to. I'm sure. Have you ever watched Darcy and Joe Bob on Shudder?
Yeah, a little bit. I actually see more of their material from following them on Twitter. But yes, I have seen it.
This is one of their classic arguments. She is a staunch supporter of the 2003 version, and he thinks she's absolutely nuts for it. You know what I mean? But it shows you like the generation gap, right? Because I went to my sister's house one night. I don't remember what the reason why I was even going over there was, but when I went in, the kids were watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake on MTV, and it was heavily edited on MTV. But I told them, I was like, "You guys like this movie?" I'm like, "I can't believe you like this movie." I'm like, "I have the Blu-ray version of the '74 film. You guys have never seen that?" And I asked her if they could watch it. She said, "Yeah." So I got right back in the truck, drove back to the house, got it, came back, put it in. 15 minutes later, they both got up and went to bed. They just did not care. They love the 2003 version. It's slick, it's clean, it's pretty, it's full of gore, and they didn't get the '74 version at all. And they picked up on the fact pretty quick that nothing was happening. You know what I mean? Like, I know that's not exactly the case, but Toby did try to take a page from Hitchcock in that movie, where it's like you think you've seen a lot, but you really haven't. You know what I mean? You're just kind of terrified through sound and atmosphere and things like that, right? And so yeah, I mean, I love that franchise. That's what I have for number 3, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think we're at number 2.
Number 2. And number 2 franchise for me is Friday the 13th. And these movies, along with my number 1, are movies I watched just a ton growing up. with friends. I had a couple of buddies growing up. We stay the night over each other's houses, and this is when we were, truly kids. And we would build like, forts around the TV, like tent forts, around the TV, and we would rent, 3 or 4 of these movies and just watch as many as we could until we started falling asleep. I have always loved this franchise. I actually love it more as an adult now than I did even as kids. And for my birthday, my wife got me the new Scream Factory, set that just came out of all the Friday the 13th, including, Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell and all those. So all on Blu-ray, all with special features. I own Camp Crystal Lake Memories. Um, I love this franchise. And you picked out number 6. I love Jason Lives. That's a good one. That's the, you know, Jason's brought back to life like Frankenstein. But my favorite oddball one is actually the telekinesis girl, the which was originally supposed to be Jason versus Carrie. And that's not a really popular one. It's really goofy, but I just always have had so much fun with that movie, just watching it with my friends. I love, Jason kind of finally really meets his match, aside from, uh, Tommy, um, who he fights through, several of them. Um, but I like the first one. I like the second one, the third one. The fourth one is really, really good. That's what a lot of people's favorite in the franchise is part four. Now, on part five, I am not a fan of that one. I watched it. Me and one of my buddies, the same guy that like Saw, we watched back through every single one of them, of the Paramount ones, which takes you up through 8. Don't really like as many after the Paramount ones. And so I saw 5 within the last year, and I still just didn't care for it. I don't know why, but I just don't. It's just not for me. But then it picks up after that. And in my opinion, you get like another awesome trilogy. You get Lives, then you get the telekinesis girl, and although it should be called Jason on a Boat, Jason Takes Manhattan is another really fun movie, and it's just got some hilarious stuff. It's one of those franchises that I can laugh along at all the goofy stuff. You have just an awesome villain, and they're just fun. They're just fun horror movies, and I never get tired of them. And the last thing I'll say on Jason Takes Manhattan is, what a poster! That poster art is so cool. And my buddy who the Saul, Zach, who likes Saul, I was like, dude, you're wanting a poster up here. Why do you not get the Jason Takes Manhattan? That would be such a cool one for you to have. And he was like, what? Love it. Ordered it, and now he's got the huge poster up in his man cave. So not I don't really like the ones after Manhattan, except for the remake. Why does this movie get crapped on so much? It has 2 cold openings to it. It's brutal. It's scary. It has some annoying characters. I will say that, but it's got some cool kills. I think it pays homage to the first few movies in a lot of ways, and it's not the best of the horror remakes, but I like it a lot. I think it's good. So anyway, I've probably already said too much, but I love Friday the 13th, and that's my second favorite franchise.
No, you made some great points there, and I think that's something that it's very much like, if you were there, you were there. If you weren't, you're not going to understand it. But the marketing campaign for Part 8 was awesome when I was a kid, because we went through this thing like around 84, 85, where they're like, let's not even put horror trailers on TV anymore. After the Silent Night, Deadly Night debacle, it's like, so they started trying to come up with creative ways to do horror trailers, right? And I love the trailer for Jason Takes Manhattan, because I still remember to this day the first time I saw it. It was it started playing, I think, during the Arsenio Hall show. It might have even been like the interview segment that he did with that. And they start going dun 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 dun, dun, and you're like, what
Hmm.
is this? And you can just see like a figure standing, and you see the New York skyline behind it. And then all of a sudden he just turns around real quick and it's Jason. You're like, what?
Hmm.
It was great, man. And
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's awesome.
maybe it should have been called Jason Takes Toronto. I don't know, or what was it, Montreal or Toronto, wherever they shot that at. But I think the only scene they actually shot in New York was the one in Times Square, right? But
Yes. Yep. You're right.
but yeah, and a lot of people hate it. They'll say, like, how did they get on a boat in Crystal Lake and they ended up in New York Harbor? I try not to question movies about a dead guy who comes back 13 times too much
Right.
because
I just
they
you
tend
just
to
go
fall
with it.
apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You try to make it's a franchise you can't make very much sense about because the timeline is all screwed up from the get go anyway. But none of that matters. It's just as a kid, it scared me some, but it's been with me for so many years, and it's just now none of it's scary to me. Obviously, it's just fun. There's a bunch. I've always been a big fan of the so bad it's good. Like I love so bad it's good movies. Um, I don't like just bad movies, obviously, but so bad it's good. And there's quite a bit of so bad it's good in this franchise that you know it's got cool inventive kills again, the great villain, and then you can laugh along with it sometimes, and then laugh at it at other times. It's just nonstop entertainment for me.
One thing I wanted to just talk about real quick because you did the remake. I think, yeah, you're right. It's unfairly maligned. It's a decent film. I think the reason why a lot of fans don't like it is because it seems like the Reader's Digest version of the first four films.
Hmm.
It's like, let's cram everything that worked from the first four films together here at the beginning because they didn't want to start again with Mrs. Voorhees. They couldn't do that. Jason's too established. They had to start with Jason. And so you wonder like how much of it is really a remake, in a sense, other than you see him find the mask again. Other than that, it's like this could have just been a sequel, right? And
Hmm.
it could have explored Jason even further because they show some stuff in here that we've all had questions about the past. Like, how does Jason just walk through the woods and somebody else is running full speed and then he's got tunnels. There's tunnels everywhere.
Hmm.
He's kind of like a guerrilla warfare expert to a certain extent. And yeah, so I agree with all that, and I'll move on. At number two, I have George Romero's Dead series. Recently I read that he says that once you get to Diary of the Dead, that's not the same anymore. He says that's a totally different universe that he created for a different type of film somehow. But uh, so yeah, even looking at the first, we have, everybody loves Night of the Living Dead, and the thing that people don't understand about the Romero films, they look at them and they're like, oh, that's old and cheesy, but there's more to each one of them than just that. They're so each one of them has social commentary. It's important,
Yep.
and
And
people.
done really, really well.
Right. The first one we talk about everything from like basically racism is
Hmm.
covered in the first one, and then secondly consumerism, and then thirdly
Hmm.
we talk about how horrible human beings are. Just basically, Day of the Dead just says human beings are horrible. Look, it doesn't matter if there's 8 billion of us or just eight. We're going to be horrible to each other. And so I love all those films, even Land of the Dead, which I watch Land of the Dead and I see like Walking Dead and things like that coming from that angle too. And we're like, the humans have built these strongholds now, but they're not safe inside because we're still trapped together, you know. And yeah, I love the entire series. I think you covered it pretty well with what you talked about. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to do my number one. Then we're going to let you go last. And my number one is Nightmare on Elm Street, and the reason why is not because of Freddy. I love Freddy, but it's not because of him. It's because of the kids. I think Nightmare on Elm Street does something that no other franchise does, and it didn't do it on purpose. Let's be honest. Every way that, or we have to learn more about these kids. They're not just templates of other kids. We have to learn more about them because each kid is specific to a kill. So whatever they're into, whatever their hobby is, whatever their personality is, that's going to play into how they get killed in the film. So we have to learn more about them. And I think it gave a lot of kids who did not see themselves represented on screen a character. Oh, I like video games. Oh, I'm a black girl that's kind of a nerd. I'm a, whatever the character was. I'm a tough girl who works out. I'm, whatever they came up with for that character, there was an audience or a bunch of kids out there that could relate to that character. And I always enjoyed it a great deal that they did that because, it's like I said, I don't think they did it intentionally, especially in the later films, because like you said, Freddy really just becomes a stand-up comic at some point in this, and he's just shooting one-liners at people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the setups and the way the kids die, I think, I talked to Lisa Wilcox about this, and she kind of agreed with me that that was one of the things that she was always interested in, and how her character of Alice in Part 4 took on all those characteristics from the kids that Freddy killed, and that's how she was able to defeat him is through using their united strength, even though she defeated him twice and he still came back. But you know, uh, yeah, for me, it's the kids. It's Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's the kids. I love Freddie. Robert's great. It's hard to believe they ever even had anybody else in mind for this. I heard Robert. I went to one of my favorite things I've ever done. I went to a panel about Wes after he passed away, and Robert was there, and all the kids from Scream were there, Skeet and all them, and it was just amazing to be sitting like 10 feet from these people while they're telling all these great stories about Wes. And Robert said that he didn't have any interest in this whatsoever, other than the fact that he used to hang out at a bar, and there was a waitress there that he was had a crush on. And he said it was one of those like swanky bars at the time, and they had like TVs everywhere, and the TVs were constantly playing Last House on the Left or Hills Have Eyes or something like that. And so he got into this conversation with her, and then when he found out there was an audition for a gig with a Wes Craven movie, which I think at the time he was just playing like supposed to play a backup role or something. I don't remember, but when he went in for that, David Warner dropped out of playing Freddy. They put the makeup on him, and he got the part. And it's crazy. Like, how could anybody else play that? I mean, I don't hate the remake. I'll say that. And that's not going to win me any fans, but I don't hate the remake. I think I understand what they went for. Apparently, they wanted to make Jackie Earl Haley look like a real burn victim instead of a demonic creature from hell that's been burnt. Mm-hmm. And just didn't work. It didn't connect with people. And because of that, I mean, I don't know if there's another film where the lead actor means so much to the franchise. But for me, the reason why it's a Nightmare on Elm Street at number one is the kids. And I'm going to kick it over to you for the last one.
All right. Well, if you've listened to my podcast at all, you probably know what my number one franchise is going to be. And it's Halloween. And I am from the hometown of John Carpenter. I still live here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. This is where John is from. This is where he went to college before he headed off to USC. And Halloween, I'll tell you just a couple of quick little stories about Halloween. So whenever I was in maybe 5th grade or 6th grade, I guess, obviously I wasn't watching scary movies at this time. My mom wouldn't let me. It probably shouldn't have been anyway. But I was starting to take an interest in scary stuff just a little bit. And these girls in my class had a slumber party. And they came in the next day, and their mom had let them watch Halloween that night. And of course, it just scared them to death. And I'm just eavesdropping on this conversation, and I'm overhearing it. And the more I'm hearing about the movie, it's just like, man, this sounds so cool. I've got to go out and see this. And I finally got to watch it. Well, then the other story is, and I think I probably saw it on like a TV version or just parts of it. And anyway, loved it. Well, then I went and spent the night with a friend shortly after this. And his mom let us rent Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. The movie scared me to death. It just terrified me. I slept in the floor of my parents' room. My mom was so mad at me for watching the movie. But it's like that one of those just kind of baptism by fire. You know, you get a kid, pretty innocent kid who's never really seen anything, and then you have this, you know, just terrifying, blank-faced, masked killer, and it just hooked me. After I recovered, you know, I wanted to see more, and I think Halloween and The Shining, I go back and forth between what is my all-time favorite horror film. It's, I guess it's probably Halloween. Other days I may say The Shining, but I have such a love for the first movie, just what John was able to do. Then, you know, you've got Halloween 2, which I really like. I think it's a pretty good sequel. Obviously, it picks up exactly where the first one ends. Then you've got Halloween 3, which I've actually come to appreciate over the years. I actually watched it in October last year again, and just still enjoy it, even though it has nothing to do with the rest of the franchise. Then I've already told you, you know, Saw 4. I think 4 was a good way to reboot the franchise without Jamie Lee Curtis. There's some really good scenes in there. I think Michael looks really good in it. I'm not a Halloween 5 fan. I won't really spend much time on that. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to lose me credit, and that's probably pretty controversial amongst Halloween fans. Us Halloween fans, I think, can be a little bit snooty. We'll kind of turn our nose up at other franchises and stuff, and I try not to be that type of Halloween fan. But anyway, I say all that because Part 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, is my second favorite Halloween movie. This was the first rated R movie I ever saw in theaters. I really like this movie. It is not good, but I don't know. I just think Michael has never been as terrifying as he is in that movie. He is just a machine. He's just so violent and so scary, and there's just a bunch of cool images. Yes, it doesn't make the most sense. Yes, it kind of has a weak ending where, you know, the dude from Clueless, you know, Paul Rudd is beating him with a pipe, but I just love it. There is an alternate version called the producer's cut of Halloween 6 that is literally, I think 45 minutes are the same and the other 45 minutes are completely different. So it's almost like you have another complete version of the film. I own that one as well. H2O, when it came out, I was disappointed because I loved Halloween 6 so much. I saw H2O in theaters. I wanted them to continue the storyline somehow. Then I saw Jamie Lee Curtis coming back, and it was just basically pretending like nothing except for 1 and 2 existed. I like H2O. I think it's pretty good. And then, honestly, I really haven't enjoyed the franchise since then. But because I love those first 7 movies so much, it'll always be my favorite. I've got the merchandise, I've got the posters, I've got, you know, everything. Halloween. Now, another thing, I'm going to lose points. I wasn't a big fan of Halloween from 2018. I really didn't think it was all that great. I did not like what they did with Laurie Strode's character. I don't feel she would have done that. Like, I felt like her character from H2O is way more like believable that Laurie would be, you know, just she still thinks about it a lot and she struggles with alcoholism due to the trauma, but they just make her freaking insane, just crazy in the newest Halloween. But even with all that said, I'm looking forward to Halloween Kills. I really want a movie that feels like the original franchise, and I'm hoping that this gives it to us. So there you go, Jay. I noticed Halloween was not in your list. You may not be the biggest fan of it, but it is my franchise.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the first one. The first one is definitely inside my top 10 of all time. But, you know, I like 2. Rick Rosenthal comes in and does a decent job there. Uh, After that, man, they fall off for me really hard. And even though, like, I even had a little bit of a thing against 4 when it first came out because I felt like, okay, you guys are just trying to get into the Freddy Jason thing. I understand you started it. Now you want to make some money off of it. So you're trying to jump back in. And they did those 2 films back to back, 4 and 5. 5's really bad. But I'm going to say, yeah, for me, Part 6 is my second favorite too. And we had Daniel Farran's on, who wrote Part 6, and he had some great stories about being on set. There was he's a strange dude. That interview went a little bit off the rails when we started talking about some of his later work, like The Haunting of Sharon Tate and those movies. But I really wanted to talk to him about Halloween 6 because it's I mean, honestly, uh, personally, it's probably maybe even my favorite. I mean, like, I love the first one because it's so damn good, but this is the one I saw in the theater. This was the chance I had to see a Halloween movie in the theater. And I just remember, like you said, the mask is great. For me, Halloween is always about the mask. If they screw the mask up, I'm done from scene one. I don't care about it. Uh, and this one, I thought it's the best representation of Michael. And even though, yes, there's the producer's cut, there's the theatrical cut, watch both of them. They're both fun. I like Paul Rudd in it too because I think it kind of gives Michael his Tommy Jarvis, right? Or wait, it is.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
yeah. But yeah, I like that movie a lot, and that's one I don't talk about a lot because, like you said, you'll take a hit for it if you're with Halloween fans. They don't, I understand them not liking Resurrection. That's my problem. Probably my biggest problem with the franchise as a whole is I feel like every time I look at it, they've taken an eraser and they've erased the past, and they've said, no, you got to start here now, and then no, you got to start here now. And I didn't like the 2018 version. I thought, it was totally kind of like, let's do Terminator 2. Let's do Terminator 2. We'll have Linda Hamilton's character who is now able to fight the monster, who's gone from being like, the meek girl who needs help to she can fight the monster on her own now. And I don't know. I didn't, I'm excited for Halloween Kills. I'm always going to watch everything. I'm always going to watch all of them. But yeah, I probably should have had this on my list. I actually did have it at number 10. Like I had Hellraiser, Saw, and Halloween, and I messed with it too much. I think today actually because I've had this list. We've been talking about doing this for a while, and I've had this list set up for a while, and then or about 3 hours before we started, I broke the list out and I was showing it to my wife, and I'm like, I'm going to move this here and I'm going to move that there, and then I kind of moved Halloween out of frame and didn't even throw it in an honorable mention. So I apologize for that, guys, because Halloween as a franchise should have been on my list somewhere. But luckily, Wes saved the day. Man, I had fun.
Yeah, this was great. I love talking through all these franchises. Again, not something that we would do really over real talk, though we did cover Halloween, we did cover Scream. We've covered some of the movies one off, but again, we're a all movie podcast, so we just get to horror every now and then.
So, what's up next for Real Talk? What's our next episode?
Well, we'll give you the inside scoop here. We just released our Silence of the Lambs episode, which that was a great conversation. I think one can argue it's the best film of the 90s. It's not my personal favorite, but I'm not going to argue with anyone that thinks that Silence of the Lambs is the best film of the 90s because it is so great. So we just released that really to honor its 30th anniversary. Up next, we've been doing these little episodes. We tend to go a little long on Real Talk, I guess, as you can imagine, listen to me talk through my franchises. But we try to do these episodes called Reviewing the New, and that's where we just each pick a newer film. We give you a mini review and let you know whether you need to bother watching it. That will release on Saturday. And we're going to cover Wrong Turn, the new Wrong Turn. I do, obviously, the horror guy. We're going to cover Mank, and I can't remember which one Gabe chose. Sorry, Gabe. But anyway, we're going to release that next. And then our next full episode, which will be out in 2 weeks, we're covering erotic thrillers.
Oh,
so
boy.
We're going to talk through the erotic thrillers that were really big in the 80s and 90s, and then by all means have pretty much dried up today. They really don't do them anymore, and we'll talk about that and talk about why. But we're having Jay, you should talk sometime with Kayla from the Strikes My Fancy podcast. She is just awesome. She is a great host. We had her on for our one of our Guilty Pleasure series episodes. She's going to join us to talk erotic thrillers. Each of us has picked a feature review we're going to do, and then we're going to talk about just those movies in general. So that will be out in 2 weeks. And so you're the first to know that. You're getting the inside scoop.
I can't wait because I love those movies. I did a series on them a while back. I did a series called 80s, 90s Thriller Rewind. And I talked about Whispers in the Dark and Sea of Love and all those movies that people have kind of, the bigger ones people remember. They remember Fatal Attraction and they remember Basic Instinct, but there's a ton of them. Blue Steel with Jamie Lee Curtis. There's a ton of them from that era.
Jade and
totally,
Body of Evidence and just on and on. There's all kinds of them.
Tons of them. So great stuff there. And guys, don't worry. I'm going to put the link to Real Talk in the description to this video that you guys are listening to, hopefully right now, if you've made it this long. And you can click that link and it'll take you right to Real Talk and everything they're doing over there. Wes, man, I had a great time. Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. Anytime, Jay.
All right, guys. We will talk to you the next time. Got something worth talking about. Bye.